This is the type of piece made for export. This is actually a rarer style made for export because although it's hard to see on the image, it's actually with European decoration. And this actually was made in the period of Wan Li. So it is the end, or rather towards the end, of the Ming era. And this bowl would be about...
It's a lot more finely decorated than the earlier provincial pieces. The provincial pieces were very simply done, weren't they, I noticed? And
that's right.
And this, obviously, the later pieces is sort of, is it Kangxi?
Well, if we look at this piece here, this is the bottom half of like a picnic box. It would have originally... It's a box. It's got, if you look, there's got two holes here, so it would have had metal rings. It's a canister. So this was a typical piece used for export. But it's and this was made in the Kangxi period. So it dates from about 1680.
Can you rotate it around for the viewer?
But what's very important about this particular piece and why buyers would be very interested is the colour and quality of the painting. It's a very, very fine example of landscape, which is a typical willow pattern piece which shows mountains in the background, a lake, people on a boat, or people courting.
Okay.
Another piece, which is actually this one here, which I want to show you. It's a little bit later, but this is basically what standard export is all about. Again, in the 1980s and 90s, I used to buy whole dinner services of this. There could be 80 or 90 pieces, meat platters, tureens, and a plate like this today is not worth a lot of money, maybe 60 to 100 pounds.
Mm-hmm. And what date would that be?
This dates from about 1770. There's no mark on the back. And one of the ways you can actually tell that this is export is that it's very, very thin. And again, there's little bits of what's called orange peel in the back, little dots which make it the age that it is. In the modern reproductions, you might well see these dots, but they're all over the piece. Again, so if this, for instance, had a Qianlong mark or a Kangxi mark, it would be wrong. It would more unlikely be a fake. So if, just for argument's sake, one turns up in an auction room and it goes onto the internet and it's described as 18th century blue and white with Qianlong mark, and it's got and it's shaped like this, and it's got this decoration on, it's going to be a fake. So that's one good way of knowing whether it's genuine or not. And also the feel is pretty light.
No, it is quite light, yeah.
Now, we're actually talking about another aspect of Chinese export, of pieces which are exported in the 17th century. I mentioned Augustus the Strong. If we look at the vases on the left, you remember in my talk about Augustus the Strong how he swapped soldiers to get a number of these large vases which stand about this high. Again, this is export vases. They were not made for the emperor. Even though they were very large, the emperor, if the emperor had a pair of vases like this, he probably had them in his courtyard. They weren't considered imperial quality.
So they'd
just
be exported to Europe.
Just exported to Europe. Now, very interestingly, this
19th century. These ones 19th century.
17th century.
17th. Oh, sorry.
From the Kangxi Yangcheng period.
Yeah.
So it could be 1720, 1730. Now the jardin there on the right is exactly what I was buying in Hong Kong Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia in the 1970s and 1980s. And ironically, I was buying it by an inch. It was £10 an inch back then. So, and it didn't matter whether it was 17th century, 18th century or 19th century. The price remained the same. So I'd buy a 19th century jardiniere like that, 24 inches in diameter, it would be £240.
Wow.
If it was 17th century, it would also be £240, irrespective that it was worth 5 or 6 times more. That was irrelevant to the Chinese. They looked at these pieces being utilitarian and not of much use other than being put out into the garden, filled up with earth and used as decoration.
Especially
if it had a mark on, which it could do, it could have a Kangxi mark, then of course it would be a very, very rare piece, but it would probably be a provincial mark. It's not fine enough to be of imperial porcelain standard. So this whole image has a very, very interesting story. Back in the 18th century in England, huge taxes were applied to any porcelain that was coming in from the Orient into England.
So what does
in
clobbered wares...
in blue and white.
So clobbered wares...
So what happened is, so they diverted the boats to Holland, where they painted all the blue and white vases, then re-exported them so they could be re-imported back into England and avoid the huge taxes. And all of these vases became, and pieces with this added decoration, became known as clobbered ware. And
was the value less because it had been clobbered?
Very, very much so. In the 80s, 90s, and even now to a certain degree, this type of decoration is very fashionable. Americans used to love it. It won't be so fashionable in China, but maybe there'll be a new craze and people in China will start buying it.
So they overpainted them, but could you take the paint off when they were back here, or
no,
that was it?
No, because it would be refired. There may be a way that the Chinese can do it, because the Chinese will attempt to do anything. Now, just to give you an idea of size, the vases in the centre, on the centre shelf, all the tall vases are about 18 inches high.
Okay.
Now, this is another typical decoration, European decoration, made for the European market. Of course, this particular tureen is very, very rare, and it would have had an underdish as well that accompanied it. But again, it would still be part of a very large dinner service that a member of aristocracy would have in his home. But I'm really just showing it because of the shape. It's actually taken after a silver shape. A lot of pieces of porcelain were originally made in silver, then copied. So if this particular piece had a Qinlong mark on it, it would be totally wrong. You wouldn't really
it's a European shape, isn't it?
It's a European shape. So again, but it's very feasible for modern versions of this piece to turn up with marks. So that would tell you straight away that it's not going to be genuine. Now we're looking at bog standard pieces of 18th century Chinese export, just like the plate that I showed a moment ago. This one here. Although this has got a willow pattern decoration, it's exactly the same date as the plate in the centre or the teapot there.
1760, 1780 sort of thing.
Something like that. And if you pass me over that mug.
This is a traditional export mug, isn't it?
Traditional export. And another very, very good thing to do, don't do what I'm doing, holding this by the handle. But just imagine this was full of liquid, because this was what it had been made for. The likelihood, if there's any weakness in the handle, it's going to break.
Yeah.
Always hold a piece like this. Like this.
How much is something like that worth?
This about £400. Again, it has the very, very typical willow pattern decoration.
Can I have a quick look at it? very finely done, isn't it?
It is finely done. It's finely done, but there's no comparison in the painting. This is a lighter blue, that's a harsher blue. This, of course, was done 100 years earlier, and it's a really beautifully rich blue.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the quality, the tightness of that is so much better than.
Bearing in mind, there were millions of those mugs made. How many, and a lot less of these. If we move forward, I happened to just buy this on the way up here today, and this is actually part of an hors d'oeuvre set. So I've actually got 4 dishes which actually surround this. It would have been made to go on a wooden tray, and it was just...
It's a later piece then?
It's a later piece, and it dates from about 1880,
yes,
towards the end of the 19th century.
And
again, very much for export. And it's not really the sort of piece the Chinese are necessarily looking for.
But you can tell it's real, though, can't you?
You can tell it's real. It's got some age to it. And this border is copied from an 18th century border. So it's actually in the style of it. And again, it has an unglazed base. Now, another thing you will never ever find on Chinese porcelain is a seal mark, like a Qinlong mark, or even a 19th century mark on an unglazed base. That's another very good sign to look out for that it's fake.
Good points for the viewer to notice, thank you.
And also, going to that mug again, that type of piece wouldn't have a seal mark or an Emperor's Reign mark on it. There may be occasion when it can actually happen, but it's unlikely to happen. It might have been done by a provincial kiln. So now we're looking at 2 19th century copies of
earlier pieces
that were originally made in the Kangxi period. So in effect, the 2 jars on the right would have been copied from a style that was made at the time this bowl was made. The pair of vases on the left are what are called Famille verte, and again, they would have been copied from a pair of Kangxi Famille verte vases made.
But they still have value. I mean,
very
19th century Famille verte vases here can go for £500 to £600, couldn't they, for the pair?
You got those are about
1,800 £1,800.
No, those are about 18 inches high.
Oh, okay.
They can, the way the Chinese market that goes at the moment, they can be anything from £5,000 to £10,000 or more for
really?
a 19th century pair.
Okay, wow. Shows my valuation skills on 19th century Chinese porcelain.
Now, if holding this yellow ground dish, this is a very, very rare Ming dish made for the emperor. All these catalogues here, and the jar.
You have one here, I believe, actually.
And it's also very, very important.
Is this the one here?
Yes, that's something.
Yellow ground blue decorated dish, fine Ming.
And what is the again? So that's
3 million Hong Kong dollars. So,
well, back then it was about £200,000. I don't know what date it was. This is actually the same dish or
same
similar
dish
that actually dates from. This was actually sold in 1988.
And that's the same dish from the book from Sotheby's.
That's right.
So that's Sotheby's catalogue. Sotheby's to Christie's, same dish.
And this, for just for argument's sake, you can actually read it here. It actually says Sotheby's Chinese export and decorative. All of export and a lot of Chinese works of art that were made were considered to be decorative art and export, as opposed to made for one of the Ming or Qing emperors and being imperial in quality. So what are we looking at here? We're actually looking at a modern reproduction of a pair of vases that should have been, at their latest, made like the pair on the left that were made in the 19th century.
1840s, 1860s.
But what they're actually trying to do is to copy a style of Famille verte that was made about 1680.
But this is a very crude copy. I mean, you can tell.
Very, very much. And the other thing, of course,
the detail's very limited. You can see a brush stroke around the outside.
Very, very much. And of course, that type of unglazed rough edge, it's the colour which is not genuine. And also, another very good pointer is that this was a lot that came up in auction. So obviously, the person who's actually illustrated it wasn't that new, or it wasn't old. So he didn't care about having the mark sideways.
So what are the? I can see there's 6 character mark there on the side. If it's a auctioneers can make decisions, but for the viewer, give us your top sort of 4 points to look out for, to spot a fake and to tell the.
It's very hard. Look, when I told I was giving this presentation, I was told, Lawrence, you're shooting a bullet through your foot. It's really impossible to tell. It's more about giving advice. It's more about
giving a feel for
getting a feel, going along to a genuine auction at Sotheby's, Christie's, Bonham's, Woolley or Wallace, where they have specialist Chinese sales. Buying a catalogue like this, and this is a huge double volume catalogue for Bonham's. It's a couple of years old. And yes, it will set you back £50, £100, but it's important to get a feel that you can't get so easily on the internet. Now, something else I want to actually show you before I actually show you, this is a genuine brush pot. Now, it's a different type of porcelain. It's called crackerware. You will notice a lot of cracks in the glaze. There is also bad damage.
Bad damage, yeah.
Something you've got to watch out for is the Chinese are very clever at faking. They will even fake the damage. They could put rivets into the piece to make it look older than it is. And what they do, they bury it into the earth to give an older feel, an older effect. This is the genuine article, which has been unfortunately dropped. But this is something to be aware of.
How old is that?
This dates from about 1680,
okay,
from the Kangxi period. And again, it is glazed and unglazed. So it's more, I think if you're coming to me, the questions you should ask me is, how authentic is the information I'm giving you? Where did I learn this information? What guarantees are you going to give me that the piece is what you say it is? If it turns out to be a reproduction, can I get my money back? All these factors are very, very important. If I start to hesitate, walk away. And I think it's all about the credibility of the person.
So
more so than trying to say to me, how is this? If you wanted to learn how it was old, you'd have to spend several weeks visiting me, and I would show you a large selection of pieces. I would go along with you to a sale and give you a much better idea of what is 18th century, what is 17th century, what is 19th century, and what could be brand new.
So the trick is, what you're saying, as far as I can understand, is to go to the big sale rooms, obviously, go to the British Museum or the British Museum and go to the Oriental departments in those museums and go through the different ages of the Chinese porcelain, because they would be right. And
very. No, but even with that, even they can make mistakes, and have made mistakes. But of course, the other thing you've got to do is buy an old book like this, which I was showing to you before. Mm-hmm. this would cost a couple of £100. Why it's important to buy an old book is you won't see any fakes in the book. You won't see any modern reproductions. So you're going to be seeing all these wonderful pieces as they originally were, not faked in any way at all. And of course, the other person you should also go in to see is a specialist dealer.
Yes.
Because at least you're going to get genuine knowledge.
Well, thank you very much, Lawrence. I think that's been really fascinating. It just shows it's opening up a whole new can of worms, so to speak, to find out about the fakes and forgeries in the Chinese market. I mean, it's difficult, but your best advice is to use a reputable dealer, to use a reputable auction house, and to go to the museums to check, do your homework, and obviously buy what you love. And if you need to buy something,
I think you've got to buy, as you say, buy what you love, buy your pocket, what you can afford. If you can't afford it, don't let the dealer coerce you into buying it. Okay. Then you're going to run into a problem. Again, in the auction room, you know, you've got to think about exactly what you can afford.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Lawrence. It's a tricky one.
It is a very tricky one.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've got a nice little overview and a flavour of the Chinese porcelain market there by Lawrence Mitchell. Thank you kindly, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.